Well, welcome again to the Stearns Financial Group Business Owner Ideas Series podcast. We talk here a lot about practical ideas, and today we have just a fantastic opportunity to speak to Dr. Madelynn Stackhouse about what I'll call very simply finding out the answers to questions that most people don't ask. We're going to do this by talking about surveys today. We're going to talk about finding out what your audience is really interested in, whether that's a client audience or market audience. But we're going to talk about some ways to do that. We're going to talk about some ways not to do that. We're also going to talk about some case studies that Dr. Stackhouse has been involved in and give us some real insight into how to do this well and what things to look for and what things to not do. And so with all of that having been said, let me introduce Dr. Stackhouse. Dr. Stackhouse is a founder of Stackhouse Consulting. She's an associate professor at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, and she's a Margaret Vanoy Hill Dean's Notable Scholar. And something she told me just a moment ago is she's a literati winner, and I'm going to let her explain that to you. But it is just absolutely my pleasure to have you today, Madelynn. And
thank you.
So how about just a few minutes about yourself and
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for having me here today. Delighted to talk with everyone today. So I think to explain my expertise, I will start by saying that I'm an organizational psychologist. So if you think of psychology as the understanding of humans and human behavior, that in the organizational context is helping organizations understand individuals, groups, organizations, and the broader market. I'm a researcher as well as a practitioner, and I feel like that's sort of like a rare combination. But what I do, broadly speaking, is ask the question of how can we make organizations better? And so that's really my personal mission. And as a scholar, I study all kinds of things from the dark side. I study the dark side of people and organizations, like when things can go wrong. And that speaks to, your question just a moment ago there, Kurt, about my literati award. So I do a lot of writing. I've written many peer-reviewed academic pieces. And then in the organizational side, I work as an organizational psychologist with organizations to help make their organizations better.
Yeah. And listen, I think, one of the things that I like to do is summarize outcome value, right? And the reason that articulates very well to anybody who's listening here is because I started off by saying surveying, asking the right questions, getting into a space that you haven't been in before. And you added the flavor of saying organizationally and, kind of big picture across the planet, which could be a whole series of things. That's where your expertise is: research, development, understanding, and really learning people and what their tendencies might be. And you do that with tools. So yeah, great. That's fantastic. So today, what I would really like us to narrow in on is your experience related to asking the right questions. And some of the vehicles that you have used. I mean, I mentioned surveys, and some of that, frankly, is just very selfish in my respect, because there are some things that I really think we can do with survey data, finding out what people are thinking, that can be real valuable to them, right? But the thing that I would really like for you to articulate a little bit is when we talk about the power of asking questions, surveys being one way. Tell me a little bit about your process when you think about how do you find out what the right question is, or how do you arrive at that, or because that's a science. And, of course, you got a lot of experience with that.
Right, absolutely. So I think to answer that question, the best place to start is to sort of back up a bit and answer the broader question of why you should even ask questions, why questions matter. And the answer to that is they are everything. If organizations are not asking their customers questions, if they're not asking their employees questions, if they're not trying to understand some of the problems and pitfalls, both in the market as well as internally, that's problematic. So think of it this way. Imagine that I put you into a place where there's a dense fog and everything is riding on you, hitting a target far off in the distance in order to succeed. You're spending all this time in the fog building this bow and arrow so that you can hit this. I've spun you around, and now it's up to you to make or break the day and to hit that target. But you're in fog. How likely is it that you're going to hit that target? Kurt, what do you think?
Non-existent, likely.
Exactly. And this is the problem with not asking questions. You're trying to shoot something at a target when you don't know where the target is. And a lot is riding on it. You've invested a lot of money, let's say, in building this bow and arrow. So what questions do, both externally or internally, to ask your market or your internal stakeholders, your employees, is erasing that fog. So that you have a clarity for where you're shooting your arrow, where you're investing your time. And so it's the essential basis really of strategy. And I say that because a lot of the times, to your question, when I first talk to organizations, not everybody understands why they should be asking this information. It's something like this. Well, I have this great idea. People will want this. My product is important for the world because I think that this is a great idea because it solves this problem because, etc. But a lot of these are assumptions, right? How do you know? And so the only way you can truly know is by asking questions. And there's so many examples out there of organizations that haven't succeeded because they failed to ask questions. So we all remember Blockbuster, right?
Yeah.
Too big to fail.
Yeah.
Where are they now?
Yeah.
They didn't ask the right question.
They're Netflix now.
Correct. Exactly. And there was a time actually when Netflix approached them to buy them out, and they said no.
Yeah, we've got a good model. We just, and again, listen, that is so telling. And I think it's exactly correct. A guy that wrote a couple of books, but one of them was called Ask. It was a guy named Ryan Levesque, and he's a Canadian, which I know you appreciate because you're a Canadian. But this book, Ask, was kind of a groundbreaking work about the power of asking your customers the questions. Right? Apple did it years ago, but then Apple said, it's not really the questions we ask, it's the places that we know that people want to be. That's how we design our products. It's not, they don't ask a lot of questions about, do you need an iPod? Well, the answer to that is no, because I don't know what an iPod is, right?
Right.
And so this is so important, right? Curiosity in asking questions is always a predicate to a better solution. And I think when our business owners listen to that comment and they think about, well, how often do I ask my customers what they're thinking? How often, one of the things that when I coach a business owner, one of the things I talk to them about is something that everybody talks about, which is customer experience. And, we all now have the nomenclature of 5 stars being the absolute best customer experience going. Well, how do we know that? Because we've got all of this data that says, hey, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It was, blah, 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 blah. And I've asked this question in many settings. What about a 6-star customer experience? What does that look like, right? And I only use that example because it really it's indicative of never stopping asking questions, because you always have a better outcome when you ask more questions, right? Elon Musk is a perfect example. He's one of the most curious guys on the planet. Warren Buffett is the exact same way. We can name them off, and I think you're exactly right. Having said that, Madelynn, in your experience of using the tools that you use and helping organizations find out information that they would normally have found out if they didn't work with you, tell me a little bit about your experience and give me some of the headlines, some of the things some of the clients that you might remember, and just, generically what that looks like.
So are you asking about the types of questions they should be asking?
Well, just the outcomes, the experience you've got and the things they've accomplished and what the work you've done.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, great question. I think that there's 2 types of people that I work with, or organizations that I work with. One is the proactive organization that says, look, we know we need to ask these questions. We know we need to do a better job at this. Like, we're hearing from our employees that there are these extreme problems, and we really want to understand better what they are so that we can fix them. Or, we really think that we're going blind in terms of our market and where we need to go for the next 10 years in this hyper competitive market. And so please help us ask the right questions. The other group are those that come to me with a problem. Hey, we don't understand why this isn't selling. We don't understand why we're having such a hard time engaging our stakeholders. Please help us understand what is going on. And to that second group, it's because if you go back upstream 5 levels, it's because assumptions might have been made and then sort of going forward. And I think that this is a sort of common thing, especially among entrepreneur groups. Millennials in particular are really excited about new ideas, very entrepreneurial in spirit, and just want to go, just want to like hit the ground running. Like, I have my idea, I just want to go and do it. And it's important to like take a breath, pause, and make sure that you're getting the right information. And yes, there's all of these examples that you hear about, like Apple. So Apple, you were speaking about, it's very clear that we don't know. Our customers don't know what they want. So we're going to innovate and give them what they don't think they need, but they do need and they do want, right? But the important thing with that is Apple is still asking questions, right? They're still making sure that their interface that they're using on their phones is user-friendly. They're still asking whether, things are an appropriate price point. And when they don't do that, so this is what can happen. So Apple, they developed, I can't remember what they're called, but the virtual realities.
Yeah.
Way out of price point. They
Yes.
didn't ask the questions. They didn't ask. They just went ahead and assumed, right? And so this is one of their fastest canceled products ever. And so organizations, even really successful ones, should never stop asking questions. Yes, you can try to innovate, but still you need to do that market research at some point to make sure that you're going the right direction. So I think that that's a really important thing. Other important things to keep in mind are asking the right questions. One of the common missteps is asking this question too much. Why? And so you would think that that's actually a really good question, but it's problematic from a couple perspectives. So psychologically, let's say that I'm asking you, Kurt, why do you spend your time doing that? Why are you reading those books? Why are you doing this? Like, how might that make you feel as a person? It can be thought of as like questioning, like, is it okay that you're reading those books? Is it okay that you're doing these things? So why can be extremely problematic because people can get defensive when you ask the question why.
Feels judgmental is what you're basically saying.
Exactly. And cognitively speaking, like what can happen is it actually like shuts down, psychologically, like your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking area of your brain. And it activates sort of like this defensive, lower cognition affective state. So not a great question, even though organizations might think that it is. So the more time that you spend, if you're thinking about creating a survey, you generally speaking, spend more time crafting your questions, pilot your questions, give them to your administrative assistant and say, like, how do you interpret this question? They might give you helpful feedback. It's never a mistake to spend time making sure that you're asking the right types of questions. And there's all kinds of pitfalls as well we can discuss in detail. But to answer your question, that's the big one too.
Yeah.
In mind.
Yeah, that's great. I think one of the things that my experience, and I'm sure that folks listening to this now have had this experience, is that I'll use the term survey, but asking questions can be onerous. Meaning, you look at something and somebody says, yeah, just take this survey. We're going to give you a 10% discount. And 10 minutes later, you're still doing a survey. And that's obnoxious. And so I think, hopefully I didn't insult anybody who enjoys taking surveys for 10 minutes, but I can tell you that I don't. And I think one of the things that, the folks listening might want to hear is when you're developing something, let's just say you sit down with an organization and they say, Madelynn, I cannot figure out why this customer base is not engaging with me. What is my problem, right? And you say, well, there are 3 questions we should be asking. They said, well, no, we need a lot more questions than that because you get my point. I'm going to stop that with a dot and let you fill that in.
Absolutely. So I see this all the time, and I agree with you. Like, I don't want to answer a 10-minute or even 30-minute, whatever it might be, survey. And so I think that's sort of like the sweet spot of time that you want to aim for is no more than 7 minutes at most. So 5 to 7 minutes is like sort of like the maximum. And these should be questions that are simple enough that people can quickly answer. Mistakes that I commonly see are one that you just mentioned, like way too long. People don't want to do a long survey. And then questions that are too complicated that have, in the psychometric area, what we call is double-barreled questions. So questions that within them have like multiple things. So how much do you like skiing and golfing would be an example of a double-barreled question. You can't answer both of those things, and it takes like a lot of cognition to answer them, and the information that you get at the end of it is not helpful because they might like only skiing or only golf. So that very, very, very common is to just create too long, too complicated of questions. And the third sort of challenge that organizations might have, with this problem of engaging their customers or their stakeholders is that they're not providing any sort of incentive. What is in it for you to spend 7-ish minutes, let's say, to complete this survey? You have to offer something that's going to be meaningful to your client base or to your stakeholders. It could be anything. It could be enter a draw to win 2 hours of free consulting to help your organization ask the right questions. It could be, 30 minutes with you, Kurt, to better diagnose and understand, how you transition if you're wanting to sell your organization. It could be, here, download these like 10 tips that you can use right now, action strategies to better your organization, like whatever it might be. There has to be something, there has to be a carrot. Like, I think that's the best way to think of it. There has to be some sort of carrot for why someone would want to spend the time doing that survey. Otherwise, why bother? And sort of, I will add to that, 30% as a response rate is a good response rate. I think organizations sometimes have it in their mind, I need to get at least half of my potential customers to respond to this. No. Your goal is 30%. And if you reach close to 30%, you should do a little party.
Yeah, home run.
That's
right?
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and listen, I think that's fantastic, and I think the idea of, and I'll use marketing terminology, a lead magnet effect, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
that's idea what it is. It's a giveaway, but I mean, let's just call it a lead magnet for a moment. Is really powerful. But here is the question I think maybe the audience is listening to, because every bit of what we just talked about is wonderful. It's the results. So when we get the responses, how do you, based on the way you've crafted a question or you've set up the framework for the survey, how do you design or develop what you're looking for in terms of outcome? So, and I think that's the right question.
Absolutely. So that should emerge naturally from from a really, really careful time spent asking the questions should directly relate to how you're looking at them. So if there's a couple common methods in terms of asking questions. One is a survey, which we've talked about, which is, Likert type questions where people answer on a scale from like 1 strongly disagree, 7 to strongly agree. And the other is focus groups where you're asking sort of the broader questions like who, what, when, where, how, help me understand, etc. Based on the very careful way that you approach the questions are the way that you should interpret them. So asking the question that we spoke about a moment ago, which do you like better, skiing or golfing? Like, you should naturally know where that information is going into some sort of dashboard and how you're going to be using that information. And if you're not thinking about that when you're designing the questions, then that's part of the problem. You need to make sure that the question you're asking directly ties into the answer that you want to get. So if I'm thinking, well, I want to understand what percentage of my client base enjoys skiing because we want to, market our skis to them. Thinking about that question and how you're going to use it for that client base understanding will help you then think, oh, well, actually, this isn't the best question because I'm asking about golf within it. So they should naturally be very closely aligned, and it should be very closely thought about. And you can approach them in any certain way. Using this ski example, you could, if your main goal is to understand what percentage of your base really wants golf, really likes golf, so you can sell them golf equipment, then all you would do is you would look at sort of the general agreement overall with that question. Alternatively, if you're using it for a different function or a different purpose, let's just say that you're wanting to I don't know, you're wanting to understand how people don't like golf or how much people are not engaged in golf so that you can better educate them on like the benefits of golf, then you would approach the data in that different way. You might be looking at like mean scores and standard deviation. So my mean is 2.56 on a scale from 1 to 7. So that gives you very different information than overall agreement. And further to that, you could segment it based on population. Maybe you're looking at it based on millennials versus older adults versus, high school students, like whatever it might be. You might look at sort of the differences so that you can segment your market based on, 3.25 here, 2.63 here, etc., and then target, educating people about golf, for example. So to answer in brief your question, think about very closely the alignment between the questions that you're asking and the data that you want to get out of it. And then you can approach your data once you get it so that you can best answer the question that you're wanting to answer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One of the questions that I would add here, or one of the things I would add here and ask your thoughts on this.
Right.
Does it not make sense that we start with the answer we want and we build our survey questions backwards? So that basically, this is what I'm hearing. So, tell me I've gone off the reservation, but the way I'm hearing this is, let's just say I want to find out how many of my customers ski every year. I'm using something very simple. Okay. Then my answer is, how many times a year do you ski? That's my answer. And then the question that I need to ask is, do you ski? This is my portfolio. I'm sure you're much more elegant than this. How many times a year do you ski? Where do you go? Do you enjoy skiing? These are this is the portfolio of questions that could make up how we get to that answer. And then you design from that and develop. That's how you develop. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, if I were sitting still, I would start and think about an answer first. And so when someone listening to this is thinking about how they might engage and work with you or think about something like this, do you really need them to understand their answers first? What is it I'm trying to get to? Or do you help them do that?
It's what you want to get to. It's not the answer that you want to get. It's what you want to get to, what kind of understanding you want to take away from that. And the reason for that is because one of the pitfalls with asking questions is to ask questions in a way that you get something called social desirability. Like, people want to be helpful, they want to answer your questions. So if I know that you're asking about skiing, for example, and that you favor skiing, the answers that you will get will be more biased towards that, as opposed to asking questions in a more general way. So I'll use an example from like a nonprofit that I've worked with. So they designed this, let's just say this product. They've designed this product, and the reason why they designed this product is because they really want to make a difference in the world as a nonprofit, right? And their goals are good, and they have very strong reasons for why this would be an amazing thing for society. And years ago, they contracted this marketing firm to do some market research. The problem is that this marketing firm approached the potential market asking the wrong question. They asked them more about, like, what is your aspirations? Like, is this something that you aspire to? Do you want to be an amazing, good organization that has this product? And of course, people said yes, right? Because it's something that's a social good. And now, years later, it's become very problematic for this nonprofit, because the answer they got was aspirational, but the real, day-to-day of, whether they need this product today and are willing to invest money in this product is a very different story. So it's not necessarily about the answers that you want to get. It's about asking the questions so that you get the information that you can use for, improving things or a better understanding. So you got to be really, really careful not to lead people down a path. And that's why it's so important to spend time crafting the right questions to make sure that you're not asking those problematic leading questions.
Well, and that's absolutely probably one of the most powerful comments today. Because you can do this work wrong. And back to your point precisely, here's an organization that's built a foundation on questions that they asked and didn't ask them correctly, and they got an answer that didn't fit for the future of their business being nonprofit or not. And listen, I think that's probably a problem out there. And I mean, I don't know for sure, and I'm certainly no expert like you, but I think at the end of the day, that could be really, really, really problematic, right? So it's that much more important to work with someone like yourself who really understands how to design the questions so that you don't get the information and build a framework of business or whatever it is on bad info, right?
Yes.
I used to say this. I've worked with a tremendous number of entrepreneurs, and I've been my own entrepreneur, through 5 businesses now. And at the end of the day, it's always been this idea, back to your point, the shiny object. It looks great, and we can do this. Hey, I've got this great. This is my value proposition. It's all great, and I've found myself when I counsel some of these entrepreneurs. Well, what problem are you solving? Why do they need you? What are the real reasons that someone's going to say what you are doing is really important and I want to buy it, involve myself in it, whatever the case may be?
Absolutely.
It's not uncommon for some of them to look me in the face. Well, but it's a good product.
Yes.
Well, I got it.
Yes.
But, right. Have you asked people? Right.
Yes.
So
I think that's what you've just said is essential. I think that the function of business really is solving some sort of problem that people have. Even if it's just like making their lives easier, that's still a problem that's being solved. That's what I was trying to get at the beginning of our conversation with sometimes people can get really excited about ideas and just go forward.
Yeah.
And it's important to just breathe, take that pause to understand what is my problem that I'm solving so that you can then sell that, communicate that, use a lead magnet to target people like that. And the importance of sort of the lead magnet perspective is imagine that all your competitors in your market are ducks. So you have this huge pond and there's all of these yellow ducks out there. And these are all the organizations that do similar things to you, are these other ducks, right? And on the surface level, everyone sort of to the customer looks kind of the same. Like there's a yellow duck over here, there's a yellow duck over here, there's a yellow duck over here. What an organization wants to do and why they want to really understand their market base is they want to somehow stand out. So they want to, make themselves neon green or purple or something. So they can really highlight, like their customer can see, there's the purple duck. There's my purple duck. There's my neon duck that I really need to go to. I need them to help me and solve my problem, whatever it might be, whether it's skis or golf or anything that it may be. There they are, so that that customer base is coming to you, the purple duck, the green duck, etc., to solve their ultimate problem.
That's worth the price of this podcast right there. No question about it. To anyone who's listening, that is the money, right? I would tell any business owner that's listening right now, go back and replay that comment, because that is where the opportunity and business future lies. I'm telling you right now. Well, listen, we've got a couple more things to run through and before we end today, and I'll close in just a moment. So as I'm sitting here listening, and I think one of the things that I have been exposed to over the years is the right list to send this stuff to, asking the question, what is that, right? And so if you're surveying and if you're using this idea of questioning, getting to the audience that's going to respond and give you the data that you need is really, really important. Now, in your practice, talk to the folks just a little bit about making sure that's the right audience and how you go about that.
Absolutely. Great question. And to that, I will say business has changed a lot in the last decade. It's radically different in the last decade, or like now compared to a decade ago and the 30 years before that. And the reason for that is because most customer bases, it's harder to find companies because of the global world. Number one, you're competing with the world essentially, regardless of where you're located, what your little niche market may be. So you really want to make sure that you are the right neon duck or purple duck to your client base so that they can find you. Okay. And the way that you do that is better understanding who you're targeting. So let's just say like I'm an artist. Hypothetically. So I'm an artist and I create beautiful landscapes of lighthouses, and my specialty is horses, hypothetically, right? My potential market with this is anyone, right? Anyone could want to buy my lighthouses and my horse art. But the problem is, if you try to appeal to everyone, you're just going to be another duck. You're just going to be another, yellow duck out there in the world. You need to figure out what your market is so that you stand out. Is it millennials who are between the ages of 35 and 45, for example? Are they affluent? What background do they actually come from? Are they high income? Are they low income? You really need to get very clear and very specific and niche down further and further and further, even with a broad product, in this case of like art, so that you can better appeal and target your marketing to that group. The way that I would advertise my art, for example, on social media, if I'm targeting millennials versus, I don't know, let's just say like I'm targeting high income, stay at home wives, hypothetically. The way that I advertise that will be very, very, very different compared to, say, a 20-year-old male individual that's just starting their career. I might show houses. I might walk through houses and say, this is what will give you peace of mind in your life if you have this art, compared to, here's how you can really appeal to businesses and you can decorate your offices. So you want to be very clear on who your market is, narrow it down, niche down. And when I say niche down, like there's always further you can go. If you think you're farther enough down, niche down more. Niche down so that you have a really clear idea so that they can find you, so that you're the purple and neon duck that is out there in the world. The reason for that is because the days of cold calling are pretty dead. People don't like to answer their phones nowadays. Emails are still a thing, absolutely. But people, since the pandemic, don't like answering emails the way that they did before the pandemic. And similar to that, of course, the relational aspect and sort of getting out there, meeting people, networking, etc. Relational is everything, and that of course still matters. But now, the world we live in, online presence is so important. And that's because you want to have that relational identification with your customer base. You want them to see who you are and why you, as a purple duck, are the solution to their problem, whatever it might be, skiing, artwork, etc.
Great answer. Now listen, we're going to run out of time, which is a sadness as far as I'm concerned, because this is fascinating stuff, and I'm sure that our audience is getting a lot out of it. But let me just throw a couple of things to you and let you kind of fill in some blanks.
Absolutely.
If folks were going to plan on doing something around the area of asking the right questions and getting the answers that strategically work for them, what would be your advice and the things they should be thinking about doing? Maybe just a 5 bullet point thing, just general bullet points for folks that are listening, to kind of a call to action, give them the ability.
Absolutely. So think about what you need to know, or even better, ask yourself, what am I assuming? What am I assuming about my client base? What I'm assuming about my product? What I'm assuming about my messaging? In these assumptions, like let's just say it's my work, I'm assuming that people want pictures of horses, or I'm assuming people want skis that like,
or they like pictures of horses.
They even like art. Exactly. Right. So ask yourself what the assumptions are, and then you can sort of craft your questions around answering these assumptions and better understanding like what your market actually wants and who your best market is. And if you have, let's say you have an online presence already out there, what you can do is just start by looking at like analytics to like who are already following me, who is already engaging in my LinkedIn, who's already engaging in my company and my social media presence, or who are my relational contacts and my common, the common people that I work with. So start there, because that's sort of the clues that you can have in terms of your client base. And then from there, you can ask your audience general questions and start pivoting to different markets. So asking, let's just say you're wanting to understand like a new market. Let's say it's millennials, and you're currently targeting high income, high net worth individuals currently, but you know that this huge wealth transition is coming and that millennials are going to be taking over. So we want to market better to millennials. You can ask some questions about what you're assuming this group wants, and actually ask them if it's true in certain ways. And the best way to ask questions is never like yes or no. That's a common like pitfall to avoid, is like yes, no questions, as well as long answer. Nobody wants to answer long answer questions on an online survey. Don't do it. You're just going to get people closing their windows. You
Right.
want to ask questions like, what are your biggest challenges? And then maybe like list some things. Or have you considered XYZ? Strongly agree to strongly disagree. Things like that, where people can answer from a strongly disagree to strongly agree perspective. And the best sort of anchors that you will want are scales from number 1 to number 7. That seems like an odd number.
Mm.
1 to 10 is too general. It takes too long, like cognitively, to think about where you want to put your answer on a scale from 1 to 10. And it doesn't give you anything, like, from a psychometric standpoint, it doesn't give you variance that really is meaningful. So don't put that extra cognitive load on your responders on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 to 5 is okay, but also not perfect in the sense that it's hard to, you as an organization, like differentiate responses if it's on a 1 to 5 scale. So 1 to 7 is the ideal because it's not too much cognitive load, and yet it gives you enough like variance so that you can see like differences in your responses from your customer base.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, those few things, niching, understanding who you're asking and where, structuring your questions so that the responses are valuable, measurable, and really impactful on what it is you're trying to solve for.
Mhm.
Finding the right audience to make sure that when you deliver your message, it's interpreted the way it needs to be. Like, I don't like horses. I really like abstracts, right?
Right.
Right. Thinking about the way you're doing that. And then when you structure the responses, making sure that you don't build a survey that gets a lot of information, but nobody will do it. Right.
Yes.
So I think those are all kind of takeaways to be thinking about for our audience. And one of the things that I'd like to close with here is talk for just a second about how you engage, a little bit about the process that you use when you work with clients, and just just a quick overview of what that looks like.
That's a great question. So just like any organization, I am in the business of trying to solve problems, right? So I start by a discovery meeting to try to, walk me through what your pain points are, walk me through like why you've come to me and like what your challenges are at the moment. And then from there, certain things can emerge. It might be that it's, not understanding the client base. It might be something completely different. Like we have high turnover because workers don't want to stay for whatever reason, and we need to better understand why we're having this high turnover. Like it could be very many different things, but that's the starting point, is trying to understand what's the challenges that you're facing today, and then from there building things up so that to better understand what the problem is. Let's say if the problem is a little bit vague, often, actually, no, not often, every single time I engage with some sort of organization, they have a lot of assumptions about what the problem is. And they think that, let's just say it's safety, because I used to do a lot of work in safety and organizational climate. They think that it's, hypothetically, a lack of care by the workers. Workers just don't care, like they just are not engaged. And, we're having all of these accidents because they're just careless, hypothetically.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an assumption. And oftentimes it's not what the leaders would assume it to be. So that's why the data gathering is so important.
Yeah. So basically an assessment, then
Yeah.
you go through a phase where you talk about what you've learned in the assessment phase.
Mm-hmm.
Then you take that and say, okay, well, here's how I can help you,
Correct.
client, and
Correct.
put that together. And then from there, I'm assuming there's some mass customization to the approach that you use. Obviously, all of the data and content are very unique, but the structure, that you use with different clients and different types of businesses, I would imagine, has a little bit of variance in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the processes are always the same. Discovery meeting, trying to understand better what the problem is, figuring out a scope of work to try to figure out, what is going on with whatever the challenge is. Let's say it's market challenges or not understanding market, and then going about, the milestones of the process for the overall project, scoped
Sure.
out for 6 months, 10 months, 3 months, whatever it might be. And then usually there's some sort of debrief at the end. So
Yeah.
that's my overall process.
Got it. That's fantastic. Well, listen, our time is up today. And what a wonderful conversation. Now, I want to leave the audience with something as we close. First of all, thank you very much. It's just been a great
Thank you.
conversation. I think folks will, if I am hopeful that everyone has listened to the end, because I think, a lot of what we've talked about has impact here, at the end, and it puts the pieces together, which is really, part of the design. We hope that that's the way. But I think one of the most important things that we didn't talk about today, which I would encourage anyone on listening to the podcast to do is to get your contact information and follow up with you about return on investment.
Mm.
So as business owners have listened to this and thought about, well, what's it going to cost me to get this done, and what's the impact to my business,
Absolutely.
and how can, how do I afford doing something like this in a scientific way versus going to SurveyMonkey and thinking that I'm creating my best possible scenario questions that are going out and getting the wrong information.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that I would recommend to the audience is reach out to Madelynn and listen to her conversation about return on investment and how it impacts the business. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. I totally enjoyed it, and I know folks are going to get a lot out of this. And I would even say, we did not talk about a lot of topics that I think we could have gotten into, but
could have talked all day.
There'll be another time.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Yes. And I will sort of leave the conversation with this in terms of return on investment. What's the bigger expense? Spending time, spending money now, figuring out the questions to ask and the right questions, or 5 years from now, having spent 5 years of resources, of employee time, of marketing budget going the wrong direction.
We are going to leave
that is the key.
Yeah, we are going to leave it with that question. Fantastic. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been our pleasure to have you. We really look forward to seeing you on other podcasts. The podcast will have the data for Madelynn. Certainly reach out and make sure that if you're considering something in this area, learning more about your clients, finding that right niche, and really getting focused on developing your business, please reach out. We thank you. Everyone have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.